look at what's happening in cities locally where you live next to each other, you have to be nice to each other, you know people's history and stories, you respect their humanity, you treat them with dignity, you believe in your community, you want to make it a better place. I think that is a really inspiring lesson. There's really good things and really good people working hard in cities across America. And that gives me a lot of hope. And I think focusing in on the local and what's happening at the city level and building solutions on the ground in your own city hopefully makes people happier, more inspired, more optimistic about America's future.
Today's guest is someone who just doesn't talk about change. They actually make it happen. And Nicholas Lalla is the center of one of the most ambitious economic transformations in America. He is the founder of Tulsa Innovation Labs and has played a key role in turning a city known for oil and gas into a rising tech hub. His work has helped bring over $200 million in investment, create thousands of jobs, and reposition Tulsa, Oklahoma as a place where innovation can thrive. But beyond the numbers, Nicholas has been on the front lines of something much bigger, getting people to believe in a new vision for their city, convincing investors to take a chance, and pushing through resistance to build something that lasts. Today, we're going to talk about what it takes to reinvent a place, sell a vision, and navigate the challenges of building something bigger than yourself. Nicholas, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I want to start this conversation where I think it will help laymen like me, who are armchair readers of books but don't actually understand the economics of small towns. You know, we think we do. We read all the Wall Street Journal articles, but you have a real understanding of this. So I think that you would be the best at kind of translating this for an audience who learns like I do, which is I imagine that most people, when they hear economic transformation, they don't immediately think of Tulsa. But what's the first thing that people get wrong about cities like Tulsa and in the Midwest and growing economies that have the potential for innovation?
Yeah. So, I'll speak from my personal experience. I was leading the cornerstone initiative of the New York City Mayor's Jobs Plan, an initiative called Cyber NYC several years ago. Had lived on the East Coast most of my adult life. Was born and raised in New Orleans, but spent many years in DC, spent many years in New York City, and was leading this initiative for New York City when a representative from the George Kaiser Family Foundation, based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, approached me very out of the blue and said, "Hey, we'd love to come to New York, learn about your work." Said, "Sure, absolutely." Had a conversation, and in that first conversation, they said, "Hey, have you ever thought about Tulsa, Oklahoma?"
What was your immediate response to have you ever thought about Tulsa, Oklahoma? Had you ever thought about Tulsa, Oklahoma?
If I'm being and I told them, very respectfully and very honestly, "Look, honestly, I haven't. I absolutely haven't. I'm from Louisiana, we're pretty close to Oklahoma. I've never been to Oklahoma. I When I think Tulsa, and this is representative, I think, of where a lot of people are at with not just Tulsa, but kind of mid-sized cities throughout the heartland. But I think it also represents an opportunity, and I'll get to that. But for me, I told them, look, Tulsa is a blank slate in my mind. I know that it's in Oklahoma. I couldn't tell you what part of the state. My ignorant perspective honestly thought it was more southwestern than it is. I
Yeah,
thought it was tumbleweeds and desert and cactus, and it's not. It's beautifully green, it's lush. It sits near the base of the Ozarks, one of the reasons why we put green so heavily in the cover of my book. I honestly didn't even know it was an oil and gas town, just to show how ignorant I
right.
was. So I didn't think much of it, but I was intrigued by the conversation, and I love cities, love visiting new places. And so I said, sure, I'd love to come visit. Discovered that it's beautifully green, very luscious, and there's a lot actually happening. And so I think for me, the takeaway is twofold, particularly for folks that are selling products, looking to make money, looking to grow businesses, looking to start businesses, which is twofold. One, uh, there's a lot happening in cities that you don't know about that me as a New Yorker, I live in my own little bubble. But if you're in Atlanta, if you're in Orlando, you're living in your own little bubble too. And that there are tons of business opportunities, untapped potential for tech talent, for startups, for investment in cities in the middle of the country. And then second is that for Tulsa, and I think it's representative of cities across the country, many of those cities don't have a brand,
Right.
right? When you think of Tulsa, Oklahoma, you don't think of, or you didn't think of a lot. Buffalo, New York is another example, right? Several years ago, all I knew about Buffalo was that it snowed a lot and they lost 4 straight Super Bowls, right? That's all I knew about Buffalo. And I didn't know, and I knew less about Tulsa, Oklahoma. But that's an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity to create your own identity. And part of the message of my book is that to thrive in the 21st century, you need to create your own tech identity,
Mm.
your own brand in the innovation economy. And so over the past few years, we got to work in Tulsa building on a blank slate, filling in the blanks, building on local assets, and carving out a niche for ourselves in the innovation economy so that when people think of Tulsa, they don't think of nothing, they don't think of Oklahoma, but they think of emerging technologies like virtual health, energy tech, advanced air mobility, and cyber. They think of the effort to pivot from oil and gas to technology. They think of remote work. They think of the gathering place, a beautiful new multi-acre park, right? So I think the point is to build a brand that can resonate with people, and for consumers and investors to recognize that there's opportunities outside of their own little bubble.
I like that you led the book off with where Tulsa was 100 years ago. There's a Black Wall Street. This is a an innovation center where Tulsa actually had a really thriving community of business owners, professional class for the African American and Black community in America, which is one of the only of its kind. And I think that what it represents, and when I read the book, when I first was introduced to you in this conversation, was you talk about Tulsa being a blank slate, and for many many decades it was a an oil and gas town, but there was some blueprint, at least in the history and the bones of the city, that said we can do this. It's been done before. We've had success as an innovation hub at some point in the past. How do we recreate that? How do we do that again? And then there was a huge period of break because interstates came into play in the 50s and the 40s and the 50s, and then of course as the internet came about, a lot of innovation and business was sucked into these metro centers like Atlanta, DC, New York City, Orlando, Miami. In the Midwest, you've got Chicago, and then you've got Austin somehow got in there in the late 90s, and in the mid 2000s, they started figuring it out in Dallas. But you saw potential in these places where, much like where I'm sitting in Augusta, we have the Masters golf tournament, which is the biggest major of golf tournaments. But it comes in a town, and sitting as an Augustan, it comes in a town and it leaves, and that's it. Like it comes in for 4 weeks, it ruins our lives. We have to leave town, and then we come back. But we have a history of being a really fantastic town for trade. I mean, like Tulsa, we sit on a river, and so how do you work with leaders in today's modern society? I say modern in the most recent sense, to help them change their minds about what is possible about their town. I imagine you hear a lot of people call mid-sized cities towns because that's what they grew up with. When you're working with them and you're selling your vision, what connects with them the most?
Yeah, well, that you packed a lot in there. So a few quick thoughts, and then I'll answer your question. One is I commend you for doing your homework. Appreciate the quick kind of historical overview of Tulsa and the Tulsa Race Massacre. Second, you mentioning the Masters brings back good memories. I remember watching the Masters, particularly Tiger Woods's runs with my grandmother. So hopefully you can hook me up with tickets. That's a part of being a guest on your
That's
show,
after
right? I
this
get tickets.
conversation, Nicholas. I can't tell
Okay,
you
okay.
that on air.
Okay, sorry, my bad. We'll edit that out. To the core of your question, which I think is a really important question, um, and does sync with kind of Black Wall Street and Tulsa's oil and gas history. What I have found striking in my conversations with civic leaders, with investors, with corporate leaders, particularly in mid-sized cities in the heartland, is a lack of confidence in themselves as a community,
Yeah.
a lack of belief that they can do better economically, that they can build that bridge to a 21st century economy. They love their city. They have palpable civic pride, but there's a probably healthy skepticism and maybe some jadedness
Mm.
on their part where they've tried to make the pivot to tech before. They've launched an initiative. They spent some money. They got burned. It didn't materialize. Um, and so people are skeptical. You bring up such an important point, which is that these cities have innovated before, right? Tulsa, Oklahoma was the oil capital of the world for decades. And it was partly because they were sitting on massive amounts of oil, but they figured out how to extract it in really efficient ways, right? And they built an ecosystem and an industry across the state that could do that and then distribute it to the world. That is innovation.
Mm.
It is 20th century innovation, but it's innovation. And that legacy industry and the ecosystem and supply chain that it creates across the state and the region can be leveraged to pivot to tech. And so one of the key points in my book, I say that every city needs to find their own tech niche, those handful of industry clusters that represent the strongest opportunities for growth. A key factor in figuring out your sweet spot in the innovation economy is understanding what you can build on. And what you can build on is your legacy industries, those existing employers that are already
Right.
successful,
Right.
that are already in town, right? That you can find adjacencies to get to tech. And for Tulsa, obviously, the two big legacy industries in town are oil and gas and aviation, aerospace. And so when we're crafting our investment thesis at Tulsa Innovation Labs, the organization that I founded, energy tech made a hell of a lot of sense. And so did advanced air mobility. Think drones,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Where you're leveraging the talent, the employers, the ecosystem in energy and aerospace and pivoting to new emerging technologies that are just adjacent to those legacy industries, right? So you're leveraging all that knowledge, that innovation, that talent to push you in a new direction that helps support those existing industries, but also carve out a new lane for yourself in the tech economy. And so when I hear skeptics say, "Oh, we can't do it. We're never going to be part of the tech community. We're never going to grow tech jobs." You, as a change maker, need to point and say, "Look, you've done it before. You did it 50 years ago. You have that industrial spirit. You have that entrepreneurial spirit. Just apply it in new ways." And that's what my job has been over the past 10 years, is helping cities make that pivot. And Tulsa has been doing it phenomenally over the past 5 or 6 years, but it's because they're investing in themselves and they're building on what they have. They're building on those existing assets all across the region. They're not creating something from nothing. And for Augusta, right,
Mm.
it's that is, I think, a guiding principle for any city. Build on your legacy industries, build on your university assets, build on other assets, build on the masters, right? And figure out ways to make that pivot.
When I got to this part of the book, there's a lot of data involved, and you and your team are rock stars, 18 players that just, and you've moved on from this project since. But when you brought these folks on, I believe it was two people initially that you wrote about in your book. And I apologize if you wouldn't mind when you answer, just say their names so they get some credit for the work that they did. But I was an undergrad in economics, and this is where I got really interested. The data you pulled so much data for these legacy industry. The drone industry is so cool. And it wasn't something I thought about in Tulsa. I mean, it genuinely was not something that I would have ever brought to the table. I mean, you had oil and gas, and that made a whole lot of sense. And you brought all this data together, and I'm thinking about Augusta, and I wanted to quickly do an exercise with you about our legacy industries, knowing that I don't have the data, which is totally, misrepresenting some key industries. But how would you tell a leader, like a mayor or we have a tech hub here that's downtown that has 500 offices in it, and they do some really cool innovative stuff. You have some great public resources that you can go find this in. But if you were gonna invest money, if you're gonna really spend time doing this, where did you find the best data for a mid-sized city like Tulsa that informed your decisions to build that square box where you had the pillars and then you had the horizontal foundation areas of your legacy industries?
A few things. One is that one of the things that my team and I were combating in Tulsa was emotional decision making,
Yeah.
right? Where people have a lot of feelings, they have a lot of personal views and opinions. They have a lot of assumptions. Donors want to spend their money here, but not there for personal reasons. And one of the common criticisms that I heard about Tulsa's economic development over the past decade or so was that it was taking too much of a scattershot approach.
Right.
You had some partners investing here, but other partners investing there. And when you spread capital so thinly, you're not going big enough for anything to materialize. You're not creating that density of activity, of investment, of talent, of industry to grow any particular cluster. And so you're kind of, it's like a shotgun approach, right? Where like you spray a whole bunch of pebbles everywhere, but like nothing really ever hits.
Mm.
And one of the founding, kind of the key founding vision of Tulsa Innovation Labs was to take the very opposite approach, right? Which was let's leverage data and diligence a whole bunch of different sectors to find the strongest opportunities. And then once we find those 3 or 4 or 5 specific opportunities, let's go big on them and coordinate
Yes.
public, private, and social sector capital as much as possible. And that's what we did. We spent a good 6 months analyzing data around venture capital flows, around industry trends, labor market, government spending, emerging technologies. We did a rigorous scan of the region's assets
Mm.
and not just industry, but real estate, university, higher ed, hospital systems, land, etc. And through that process, which is outlined in detail in chapter 1, we identified what I call Tulsa's tech niche, those handful of opportunities that represent the strongest opportunities for growth. And we did that by leveraging data. We did that by examining regional assets. And we did that by talking to the community. We conducted over 100 stakeholder interviews
Yes. Yeah, that was really
because
cool.
pulling numbers from a database or Googling only gets you so far, right? You need to talk to people with intel, with on the ground knowledge, with community expertise who can kind of fill in the blanks. And when you do that, you create kind of a constellation of data points that you're then able to use to make an investment decision. And so when we did that, we found that the strongest opportunities for growth were virtual health, energy tech, advanced air mobility, and cyber. They were based on existing assets. They represented emerging tech adjacencies to build that bridge to tech. They offered jobs that were attainable across a range of educational levels. So you don't need a PhD to get a job in cyber, for
Right.
example.
Right.
And they represented opportunities for Tulsa to lead, not just kind of serve as a supporting player. And so that was kind of the methodology that we took that I think is replicable for cities like Augusta, for cities like Atlanta, for cities across the Midwest.
I wonder, and this is a question that I've had in my mind since I was reading your book, and you mentioned several times the importance of bringing labor in these new industry or like new verticals and adjacent industries to the legacy work that's being done in a city, and making sure that it's accessible. And you didn't mean accessible in that someone can just walk in and get a job, but accessible in the sense that you talk about again the drones, and I can't. You said the words, and I tried to remember them, and I can't remember them. But the aerospace mobility industry sounds very
Yeah.
intimidating. But what you're talking about here is that there are people in the community who will grow with the industry as well. And if you insert the right people in these jobs and these in leadership, and it's very small business in a sense that you don't need the PhD, mechanical engineer in order to accomplish your goals in developing an industry, but you should make sure that there is accessibility for the working class, people to change what they're doing. And there's been this push politically in the last decade or so with AI coming around is how do we retrain people and put them into a place where they can make a livable wage and support their families and all of this. So when you're working with these, innovation, and innovation seems very San Francisco, seems very Silicon Valley, very New York, and you're from the East Coast, but you're from the South, so New Orleans is sort of a mid-sized city as well. But you get to Tulsa, and there's probably a strong blue collar working class environment that's a strong cultural part of that city. And in Augusta, it's the same way as well. We've got strong blue collar workers. We've got an amazing culture there, but they're resistant to innovation because it seems inaccessible. So with all of this investment being siloed into very specific spots so that it actually makes impact, it's not spread too thin, and you're bringing these people into these industries, how do you actually okay, now you got this bright shiny object. How do you get the people of the community to start buying into this? Not from an investment level, but from a labor perspective.
So, good question. A few thoughts. One is that you're right that particularly in a state like Oklahoma, where there isn't a highly mature tech scene, jobs in tech are somewhat few and far between, which means that folks are less familiar with it. They're ignorant about opportunities, job opportunities. They may not be clear on what skills they need to get those jobs. It might be intimidating. It might seem scary. Kids don't grow up with parents that are working in tech, so they don't have that exposure from a young age. And in fact, one of the things that I underestimated was that fear factor
Mm,
in the first place. And I still think that Pulse Innovation Labs and maybe the broader state can do a better job explaining and communicating to communities across Oklahoma particular opportunities in tech and what they need to do to get those jobs. So I still think I think that that is still a barrier probably in the state. But for Tulsa Innovation Labs, the name of the game is to create good paying, resilient, and accessible jobs, and to build an innovation economy that is thriving. And from my view, innovation economies can't thrive unless they're inclusive. And that's
right,
become something of a controversial word these days. But what it basically means is that a wide spectrum of people have an equal opportunity to get good jobs.
right. Yes.
That's basically what it means. And the problem with cities like San Francisco and to some extent New York and to some extent Austin, Texas, right, is that a lot of the jobs in tech require advanced degrees,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
And I fundamentally believe that you don't need a PhD from Stanford to get a job in tech. And there are industry clusters, emerging tech clusters that offer a diversity of jobs. And my job as an economic developer that's looking to create and sustain economic growth and to do so in an inclusive way, I'm compelled to find opportunities that offer that diversity and then create upskilling opportunities, pathways to get into those jobs, right? And so you do a double click on real quick on advanced air mobility and drones, right? One of the reasons again why that popped as an opportunity was because it built on a legacy industry in aerospace, right? You have Spirit Aerosystems, you have American Airlines in the Tulsa region. Granted, it's in maintenance, repair, and overhaul, so fixing engines, not necessarily tech, but those are really smart workers that are used to working in the field
Mm, mhm.
that can fix engines and parts and planes, that through targeted upskilling and education can go from working on 747s to drones in a few months, right?
Mm,
And so for advanced air mobility in the Tulsa region, we want PhDs and computer scientists and software developers and software engineers developing the technologies that go into drones that allow them to fly and scan and view and image. But we also want those mechanics and maintenance, repair, and overhaul workers to help fix those drones and repair them and test them,
mm,
right?
mm.
And so the vision for advanced air mobility in the Tulsa region is you have tech talent and R&D developed at Oklahoma State University, Tulsa, but you have those technologies being tested outside the city in a more rural part of the region on a facility called Skyway 36, which is a drone port and testing facility, right? Which requires its own set of skilled workers to help operate, right? And so you're creating a corridor, you're creating a cluster around advanced air mobility, but you're training PhDs and computer scientists and engineers, but you're also upskilling folks like mechanics, right? Who want to work on drones and not 747s. That I think is a good representation of the type of work that we're doing and the type of diversity of jobs that tech can actually offer. You don't need a PhD to work in tech. Cyber is another really good example, right? There's a ton of cyber jobs, cyber analysts, pen testers, et cetera, that don't even require bachelor's degrees to work in.
Yeah.
And so for cities that are looking to grow good jobs, you have to recognize that, 40% of your populace, 50% of your population may have bachelor's degrees. The other half need good jobs too. And if you create upskilling opportunities and training opportunities to get them into those jobs, you're creating good jobs and you're doing it in an inclusive way.
You have an all-encompassing it's not political, but it ends up having some political strains to it where you say, well, 50% of the population has bachelor degrees and above, and are, higher education, but 50% of your population doesn't, and you can't leave them behind and succeed at the same time. And, I think that when you go back to the conversations you were having with around emotional decisions and who's invested in what, and, I live in a town just somewhat like Tulsa where I know you kinda get to know everybody. You talk fondly in your book that you had different access to people in a town like Tulsa than you do in New York City. I mean, it's just the upper echelons of New York City are very different than in Tulsa. So you could walk into somebody's business and go talk to the person who's pulling strings on, 4 parts of the community. And,
Yep.
they are investing in things because things are close to their heart. I mean, there's not it's not malice. I'm sure you found that there were people who truly had passion for the Boys and Girls Club, or they had passion for the track and field, or they had to be sports related or something like that, or they had investment in healthcare and what that meant for women in that community. But getting them all directed in the same place, in the same north, going north and at the same
Yeah.
time, is always really tough. And I think that I want to highlight something for you that gives readers, if you're going to read this book, if you're from a town like I'm from Augusta, you're from a town like Tulsa or somewhere else, you think, well, okay, he lives in New York City. I'm just gonna give all the objections to you up front from myself. Like, he lives in New York City. He was from New Orleans, but he moved away, and now he's telling us small towns like what to do with how to invest. And I'm going to tell you that what I've loved most about reading your book is that you spoke so fondly of the people in the town in Tulsa itself. You gave it real credence, that it wasn't just some backwater, you know, project that you needed to go fix up. You came to town and you spent time really learning and seeing how beautiful it was and the history of the place, and that there's more going on in these places than many people might want to give credit for. And so I think when I fell in love with the book, it was really that you were not surprised. I think that it was a healthy level of, oh, this is different than what I'm used to, but you had such an open heart to learning from people. It drew me into the conversation. And I guess the question I want to ask you is, uh, in a positive light, you've brought in $200 million, and I'm sure more at this point, to this place. You've helped lift so many things off the ground. You've worked with so many people. 20 years from now, you're talking to somebody, and they're in their 20s, and you're just remembering things as an old man. 50 years from now, sorry, I didn't want to age you. 50 years from now, you're an old man. What are some of the most fond memories you had in this whole project, that are just so human, that get away from I guess the business side of developing a city?
I think one of the amazing, inspiring things about Tulsa is that its reinvention over the past few years has been a community-wide effort. You go to town and you feel it. Like, you see signs of progress everywhere you look. You will run into venture capitalists and startup founders and economic developers and Tulsa remoters and the mayor and philanthropists and business leaders, literally block by block, and they're all working together trying to make their community better.
Mm.
It's messy, it's not perfect, it can be frustrating. Some folks are doing a stupid job, a lot of folks are doing a great job. So I'm not pretending like everything's hunky dory. I call Tulsa an imperfect model,
Mm.
right?
Yes, you do.
Um, and it is. I think the trajectory is strong. I think the foundation is strong. I think the work that Tulsa Innovation Labs in particular is doing is amazing. And I believe in the city's future. And there's a lot to learn and a lot going right in the city. But for me, it's the fact that it is community based and that you get to know these people on an intimate, personal level
Mm.
where you're living together. And in New York, right? It's like my neighborhood now has 200,000 people in it, and
Yeah.
it's a single neighborhood in one borough, right? And I can take the train and see another 5 million people 30 minutes from now. Um, but for Tulsa, it really is a community. And so for me, the fond memories aren't the meetings or the whiteboard sessions necessarily, right? It's going to dinner with my teammates, it's going to happy hour, it's going for walks in the gathering place with colleagues. It's just hanging out with my teammates
Mm.
that make it, such fond memories. And I think for me, the fact that this and I think the takeaway is that this is a team sport. It always has to be. It takes cross-sector collaboration, and that you have in these cities across the heartland, real people who believe in their community working really hard. And I think at the national level, we bemoan the state of leadership. We are turned off by politics.
Yeah.
And when you look at what's happening in cities locally where you live next to each other, you have to be nice to each other. You know people's history and stories. You respect their humanity. You treat them with dignity. You believe in your community. You want to make it a better place. I think that is a really inspiring lesson, particularly given that national politics can be so toxic. There's really good things and really good people working hard in cities across America, and that gives me a lot of hope. And thinking back on my time in Tulsa, this will sound so cheesy, but just inspired by the ingenuity, the heart, the soul, the sense of community and civic pride that Tulsans have. And I firmly believe that Augustans have it, folks in Columbus, Ohio have it, folks in Nashville, Tennessee have it, right? Um, and I think focusing in on the local and what's happening at the city level and building solutions on the ground in your own city, hopefully makes people happier, more inspired, more optimistic about America's future.
Get him in the White House. I mean, that was a you're like, "No, no, no.
Glad
No, no,
listen,
no, 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 not today."
I'm okay.
Yeah, good. No, it's a great lesson. I agree with you. I think that I'm a person as well, and I get caught up in things, and you look at the national news, and you read the headlines, and you sort of just kinda hate the world around you, but when you spend about, I don't know, 5 minutes just, like, walking around in your neighborhood and talking to people, most of them are pretty normal and nice, and they want the same things you want, which is, they want more money in their community, they want better things to do, and they want more investment, and they wanna be happier. And I think we can all agree on those things. Well, most of us can. And I
Yeah.
think that's a great takeaway from this book. And I got that as well. And I'm glad you highlighted that. Is that the book is a playbook. The book is a map to a successful innovation roadmap and how you can get your city to a different place than it is today. But ultimately, it's a team sport. Ultimately, it's about collaborating with your local community and making the world around you, immediately around you, better, and focusing on that. One last question before I let you have some time to tell people where they can learn more about you, where they can get the book. 20, 20 years from now, someone writes a book about what's happened in Tulsa in the 5 year span that you were in the community, and of course the period afterwards where this investment has taken hold. What would you want that first sentence of the book to say?
That's a good question. I think it's something along the lines of Tulsa has realized its dreams, but there's more work to be done. My biggest fear, and this is pure this is selfish
Good.
fear,
I want it. I want
but
all
also,
this. Be as selfish as you can be.
yeah, but also for the community. But I don't want to be the Tulsa hype guy, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I know that Tulsa, because of Tulsa Innovation Labs, because of the influx of federal dollars and the philanthropic spending and initiatives like Tulsa Remote, Tulsa's zeitgeisty, right? It's a little sexy right now. It's on the upswing. There's a lot of hype, but fundamentally, it has to work, right? These investments have to pay off. There has to be an ROI to them,
Hmm.
and which means that organizations like Tulsa Innovation Labs have to implement their initiatives really wisely. Those programs to upskill folks into new jobs, they have to work in reality. The money has to keep flowing and the work has to be done at the highest level. And you need good, strong, diligent leadership over the next forever, right?
Yeah.
And in 20 years, and I'm very honest in the book, right? Where like outcomes are still to be determined. We don't know if this has worked right. I believe in the vision. I believe in the playbook. I think it's highly replicable. I am bullish about Tulsa's future. I think the trajectory in its future is strong. But you're right. Come to me in 20 years and let's see if it's actually worked. Do one or two of these industry clusters really pay off, right?
Mm.
Can you grow 50, 60, 70,000 tech jobs over the next couple decades? Are those jobs attainable across a range of educational levels, right? Does the city produce a unicorn, right? Do
Right.
you attract a big company or two? Do you hit big and have a founder or two really make it successful, right? Um, does a local corporate acquire a few startups and grow a new sector of the economy? Who knows, right? But it's going to take constant attention and vigilance. It's going to take strategic vision. It's going to take data-driven decisions, constant investment,
Mm.
and proper execution of economic development initiatives over the next 20 years to make that real. I hope it does. I think that there's a new leadership in Tulsa under 45 years old that are strong and visionary and competent, and they believe in their community. And I have full faith in their ability to kind of get this over the finish line. But it's going to take the next 20 years to see if it is successful.
I love it. I think that you're absolutely right, and I cannot wait to see where things go. And I think you've written a book here that speaks to more Americans than maybe some folks would give credit for. I read this, and I'm not someone who pulls strings, and I read it, and I thought, this is it. Like, this is how we can get this done. And it a little bit, it had a little fire underneath me. It was like 11:30 at night, and I was telling my wife in bed, I was like, "Oh my God, you have to read this paragraph," and she was like, "Turn off the fucking light, go to bed." So really great book. You've done an amazing job
Thank you.
with this. Y'all go pick up "Reinventing the Heartland" by Nicholas Lalla. Nicholas, where should people go to learn more about you, to learn more about these projects, and to ultimately find their way into the urbanist philosophy that you have?
Yeah. Um, well, thank you for the great conversation. Loved all your questions and appreciate the kind words about the book. A few different ways. Visit my website, nicholaslalla.com, for more about my work. Follow me on LinkedIn, Nicholas Lalla. I'm probably only one of two or three in the country. Go to tulsainnovationlabs.com if you're interested in partnering with TIL or Tulsa-based organizations. And the book is obviously available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and at your independent bookstores in your city.
Nicholas, thank you so much for taking the time and being on the Sales Guru podcast. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm doing a happy dance because you watched this video. Make sure that you click like and subscribe so that you never miss one of our amazing sales training videos.